A legless alien warrior was abandoned until one human marine chose compassion over orders. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Let's return to the main character. Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole moved through the quiet aftermath with the careful steps of someone who had learned to listen to the ground before trusting it, the air still warm against his visor, his suit's readout ticking down in steady green numbers that meant life, that meant time. The battlefield had gone still in that peculiar way only unfamiliar worlds could manage, where the wind whispered over scorched stone and strange grasses bent without sound, as if the planet itself were holding its breath. Orders crackled softly in his ear, clipped and professional, reminding him of the route, the extraction window, the simple truth that his job now was to confirm there was nothing left to retrieve. Ethan had followed orders his entire career because orders kept people alive, because hesitation cost more than it saved, and because believing in the system was easier than carrying every choice alone. He scanned the terrain methodically, every movement practiced, his thoughts narrow and controlled, the way they had to be if you wanted to make it home. Then the scanner flickered, not an alarm, just a subtle anomaly, and his boots slowed despite himself. He told himself it was debris, residual heat, anything ordinary, but training had also taught him to trust the small wrong feelings, the ones that didn't shout. He adjusted his angle and saw her. The alien warrior lay half in shadow, half in the dull amber light of a dying sun, her green skin muted with dust, her long green hair tangled against the ground like seaweed left by a retreating tide. Where her legs should have been there was nothing but smooth armor cut cleanly short, not fresh, not dramatic, just final, as if the universe had already moved on. Her violet eyes were open, bright and steady, fixed on him with a calm that made his chest tighten more than fear ever could. She did not reach for a weapon. She did not beg. She simply watched, as if measuring him. Ethan's first instinct was to raise his rifle, not to fire, but because procedure demanded control, distance, safety. His second instinct, the one that came from somewhere older and quieter, told him to stop. The radio whispered again, reminding him of time, of rules, of the unspoken understanding that some losses were accepted for the greater good. He could mark the location, report, move on. That was the clean choice. That was the professional choice. He took a breath and felt the suit's internal temperature adjust automatically, a small comfort engineered into him by people who believed problems could always be solved with the right design. The alien warrior's gaze never wavered. There was pride there, and exhaustion, and something else he recognized despite the differences in skin and blood, the look of someone who refused to disappear quietly. Ethan lowered his rifle a fraction, just enough that the servos hummed in protest, just enough to matter. He checked his remaining supplies without kneeling, without turning his back, the numbers unforgiving but not yet hopeless. Water for one. Heat for one. Time for one. The orders in his ear fell silent, either by chance or design, and in that pocket of quiet he felt the weight of the decision settle fully into his hands. He thought of all the times he had told himself there was nothing he could do, of all the names he had learned not to remember. The alien warrior shifted slightly, a controlled movement that said she was still strong, still herself, even now. Ethan swallowed and made a choice that did not feel heroic or grand, only necessary. He took a step closer, slow and visible, and reached not for his weapon but for his med kit, the white symbol on its casing stark against the dark ground. Whatever came next, whatever the consequences, he knew one thing with a clarity that surprised him. Leaving her there would have been easier. And that was exactly why he couldn't do it. The med kit felt heavier than it should have as Ethan Cole knelt at a careful angle, keeping his movements slow and deliberate so there would be no misunderstanding. The alien warrior watched every motion, her violet eyes tracking his hands with the focus of someone who had survived by reading intent long before words ever mattered. The wind brushed across the plain, carrying fine dust that tapped softly against his armor, and for a moment the world narrowed to the space between them. Ethan activated the kit and checked the diagnostics, the screen glowing pale blue against the dim light, its calm efficiency almost out of place here. He did not speak at first. Silence felt safer, more honest. When he finally looked up, he raised one open hand, palm out, a universal gesture he hoped would translate. She did not flinch. That alone told him more than any translator could. He began with the basics, cleaning what damage he could reach, sealing what his tools allowed, careful not to rush, careful not to assume her pain matched anything he understood. Her breathing remained steady, controlled, the discipline of a warrior who refused to give the universe the satisfaction of seeing her break. Somewhere behind him, the radio crackled again, faint this time, a reminder that time was still moving even if he wished it would pause. He ignored it and focused on the task, on the simple truth that helping her now required nothing more than steady hands and the willingness to stay. At last, she spoke, her voice low and precise, filtered through his suit's translator with a slight delay that made every word feel measured. "You are wasting resources, human." Ethan glanced up, meeting her gaze without challenge. "Maybe," he said quietly. "Or maybe I am using them exactly how they are meant to be used." The corner of her mouth tightened, not quite a smile, not quite anything he could name. She shifted, testing the ground, then settled again, her posture proud even without the height she had once commanded. "You were ordered to leave," she said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound loud inside his helmet. "I was ordered to confirm there was nothing left," he replied. He did not add anything else. He did not need to. The distinction mattered, at least to him. He finished securing a portable heat patch near her core, the small device humming softly as it adjusted, sharing warmth without demanding thanks. The alien warrior closed her eyes for just a second, then opened them again. As if catching herself in a moment of weakness, she refused to repeat. "My name is Thera," she said at last, as though offering it cost her something precious. Ethan nodded once, accepting the weight of it. "Ethan Cole," he answered. "Marine." The title felt thinner than it used to. The light shifted as the sun dipped lower, stretching shadows across the plain, and Ethan checked the horizon instinctively. They were not safe. He knew that. But they were not alone either, not in the way that mattered most. He adjusted his position, placing himself where he could watch the open ground without looming over her, a compromise born of instinct rather than training. Thera studied him again, longer this time. "Why," she asked, "do you choose this?" Ethan considered the question, then shook his head slightly. "I do not think choosing has anything to do with it," he said. "Some things just feel wrong to walk away from." The wind carried his words away as soon as he spoke them, but he saw the way they landed, saw the subtle shift in her eyes, the smallest crack in armor that had nothing to do with metal. As the temperature dropped and the first stars began to show, two enemies remained on the field, bound not by orders or flags, but by a shared refusal to disappear quietly into the dark. The night settled fully around them, the temperature dropping enough that Ethan could feel the change through the subtle resistance of his suit as it compensated, its systems working quietly so he could focus on everything else. The stars above were sharper here than any he remembered, scattered like broken glass across a black sky, indifferent to wars and orders and the small choices made beneath them. Thera followed his gaze for a moment, then looked away, her attention returning to the horizon as if habit alone demanded vigilance. Ethan checked his scanner again, sweeping slow and wide, careful not to make the motion feel like suspicion aimed at her. The readout showed nothing immediate, but experience had taught him that absence of warning did not mean safety, only time. He adjusted the small thermal unit again, ensuring it would last through the night, then removed his helmet, letting the cool air hit his face. It was a calculated risk, one he took so she could see him clearly. Unfiltered, a human without layers of armor or authority. Her eyes flicked to the exposed skin, registering the gesture with a quiet intensity. "You trust easily," she said. Ethan shook his head once. No, he replied. I just know when pretending otherwise does not help. That earned him another pause, longer this time, the kind that suggested a thought being turned over from multiple angles. Caelthera shifted her weight, bracing herself with one arm, and though the movement was controlled, Ethan could see the effort behind it. He offered support without touching her, placing his pack within reach so she could use it if she chose. She did, resting her hand against it briefly, then withdrawing, pride intact. The radio in Ethan's suit crackled again, clearer now, a distant voice confirming extraction coordinates, repeating his call sign, expecting compliance. Ethan did not answer. He lowered the volume until it became a faint hum, enough to remind him of consequences without dictating his next move. Caelthera noticed the motion. You are running out of time, she said. So are you, he answered gently. The wind shifted, carrying a different scent now, dry and metallic, and Ethan stiffened, scanning the terrain again. Not danger yet, but change. Caelthera followed his line of sight, her posture straightening despite everything she had lost. My people will not come for me, she said, her voice steady, almost relieved. A warrior who cannot stand is a symbol they do not wish to carry. Ethan absorbed that without comment, though something in his chest tightened all the same. He reached into his pack and removed a compact beacon, setting it down between them without activating it. This can call for help, he said. Human help. Alien help. Anyone listening? Caelthera looked at the device as if it were a test. And if you do this, she asked, what becomes of you? Ethan considered the question honestly. I fill out reports, he said. I answer questions. I live with it. The simplicity of the answer seemed to unsettle her more than any speech could have. She leaned back slightly, the tension in her shoulders easing by a fraction. Among my kind, she said slowly, compassion is reserved for the victorious. To show it to the fallen is considered weakness. Ethan nodded, understanding more than she realized. Among mine, he said, we argue about it endlessly, but when it matters most, we usually know the difference. The silence that followed was not empty. It was shared, shaped by the soft hum of equipment, the distant whisper of the planet, and the unspoken acknowledgement that neither of them was who they had been when the day began. Caelthera finally reached for the beacon, not to activate it, but to push it gently back toward him. Not yet, she said. Stay. Ethan did not hesitate. He settled in beside her, eyes on the horizon, a marine ignoring orders not out of defiance, but because leaving now would have meant abandoning something far more important than a battlefield. Morning came slowly, not with warmth but with a pale light that crept across the plain and revealed every detail the darkness had hidden. Ethan Cole woke at the first change in the air, instinct pulling him upright as his suit adjusted again, the night's chill retreating inch by inch. Caelthera was already awake. She sat exactly where he had left her, posture straight, eyes focused on the distance, as if she had stood watch the entire night without needing to move. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt earned now, shaped by shared hours and unspoken trust. Ethan checked his supplies with a careful glance. The numbers were tighter than before. Enough to keep one person stable. Enough, if he was careful, to keep two alive until he could think of something better. He knelt beside her again, this time closer, not as a medic assessing a casualty but as someone tending to another person's needs. He adjusted the heat unit, replaced a depleted cell, and offered her water without ceremony. She accepted it, drank slowly, then handed it back without comment. You did not sleep much, she observed. Ethan shrugged lightly. I slept enough. She studied his face, the lines left by fatigue and responsibility, and something in her expression shifted. Among my kind, she said, those who stay with the wounded are assigned out of obligation, not choice. Ethan considered that as he sealed the empty water container and stowed it away. Where I come from, he replied, obligation only matters if you choose to honor it. The light grew brighter, revealing the uneven ground around them, the faint tracks left by retreating forces, the marks of a battle already being forgotten. Ethan stood and scanned the horizon. Again, longer this time. His mind worked through possibilities, routes, risks, and outcomes, the familiar calculations of a marine layered now with something far less familiar. He could not carry her far. He could not wait forever. But he could adapt. He always had. He removed part of his pack frame and began reconfiguring it, the metal clicking softly as he worked, shaping it into something new with practiced efficiency. Kalthira watched in silence, curiosity replacing suspicion. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making a bad idea slightly less bad," Ethan answered without looking up. When he was finished, he tested the improvised support, ensuring it could distribute weight evenly without causing her pain. He approached her slowly, explaining each movement before he made it, offering control instead of taking it. She allowed him to help her shift, her grip firm on his arm, her balance precise even without legs. The moment was careful, deliberate, free of haste. When she was settled against the support, elevated just enough to ease the strain, she exhaled softly, a sound that carried more weight than any words. "You would burden yourself for an enemy," she said quietly. Ethan met her gaze, his expression steady. "I would burden myself so you do not have to face this alone," he replied. "The difference matters." For the first time, she looked away, not in anger or pride, but in something like reflection. They began moving at a measured pace, Ethan guiding, adjusting, stopping whenever she needed, the two of them navigating the terrain as a unit rather than a rescuer and a rescued. The radio stirred again, louder now, a reminder that the world beyond this plane still expected him to choose sides. Ethan muted it fully this time. Kalthira noticed and said nothing. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows behind them, Ethan felt the weight of her against the frame and the weight of the decision he had made settle together. Neither crushed him. Instead, they grounded him. Somewhere ahead lay uncertainty, consequences, and explanations he would have to give. But here, in this slow movement forward, there was clarity. He was not following orders. He was following something older, something quieter, something that told him that dignity, once offered, had a way of changing the shape of everything that came after. The pace slowed as the terrain leveled into a broad stretch of stone warmed by the rising sun, and Ethan felt the subtle shift in Kalthira's breathing before she said anything, the kind of signal you only notice when you have been paying attention for a long time. He stopped without being asked, setting the support frame carefully so her weight settled evenly, then crouched nearby to give both of them a moment. The air here felt different, thinner somehow, carrying a faint vibration beneath the silence that reminded him of standing near a distant generator. Kalthira closed her eyes briefly, not from weakness but from concentration, and when she opened them again her gaze was clearer, steadier. "This place," she said, "is old. Older than the war." Ethan nodded, scanning the low rock formations that rose like worn ribs from the ground. "I can feel it too," he admitted. "Like the ground remembers something we do not." They sat there for a while without moving, letting the quiet settle around them, the kind of quiet that did not press in but instead made room for thought. Ethan removed his gloves and flexed his hands, the skin beneath pale and roughened, human in a way armor never was. He offered her another ration bar, broke it cleanly in half before she could comment, and held it out. She hesitated, then accepted, studying the unfamiliar texture before taking a careful bite. "It is plain," she observed. Ethan smiled faintly. "It keeps you alive. Sometimes that is enough." She considered that as she ate, slower now, her attention drifting not to the horizon but to him. "You carry yourself like a veteran," she said. "Not just of battle, but of disappointment." Ethan let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "That might be the most accurate assessment I have heard in years," he replied. For a moment, something like amusement flickered across her face, brief and restrained, but real. The silence returned, deeper now, layered with mutual understanding rather than distance. Ethan checked the sky, noting the slow crawl of clouds far above, calculating time not in minutes but in endurance. He knew he would have to make a decision soon, one that could not be delayed by goodwill alone. Caelthera seemed to sense it. "When you leave this world," she asked, "what will you say of me?" The question caught him off guard. He thought carefully before answering. "I will say that I met a warrior who refused to surrender her dignity," he said. "And that I was changed by that." She lowered her gaze, the words landing heavier than praise ever could. "Among my people," she said softly, "dignity is claimed through victory. To lose is to forfeit it." Ethan shook his head. "I do not believe dignity is something you lose because the universe decided to be cruel," he said. "I think it is something you give away only when you stop believing you deserve it." Caelthera looked up then, her violet eyes sharp and searching, as if testing the truth of his words against everything she had been taught. The faint vibration in the ground grew more noticeable, a reminder that this pause could not last forever. Ethan stood and adjusted the frame again, making sure every connection held. Before they moved on, Caelthera reached out and rested her hand against his forearm, not gripping, not restraining, simply anchoring herself there for a second. In that small contact, Ethan felt the weight of trust settle fully between them, quiet and unspoken. She withdrew her hand and nodded once. "Let us continue," she said. Ethan returned the nod, understanding that whatever lay ahead, the hardest distance had already been crossed, not measured in miles, but in the space between two beings who had chosen to see each other as more than enemies. They moved again under a sky that had lost its early softness, the light sharpening the world into clear edges and long distances, and Ethan felt the strain in his shoulders settle into a steady rhythm as he adjusted to the weight and balance of the frame. Each step was deliberate, measured not just by terrain but by Caelthera's breathing, by the subtle shifts that told him when to slow or stop. The faint vibration beneath the ground faded as they left the ancient stone behind, replaced by a quiet that felt watchful rather than empty. After a while, Caelthera spoke again, her voice thoughtful instead of guarded. "You treat my limitations as temporary," she said. Ethan glanced back at her, surprised by the observation. "I treat them as real," he answered. "But not as the sum of who you are." She absorbed that in silence, her gaze drifting across the open land. "Among my people," she said, "worth is measured by function. What you can no longer do defines what you are allowed to become." Ethan let that sit for a moment, then responded carefully. "Where I come from, we struggle with that too," he admitted. "We just pretend we are better at hiding it." The honesty seemed to ease something between them, thinning the last layer of distance. They paused again near a shallow ridge, Ethan checking his scanner while Caelthera studied the sky, her instinct still sharp despite everything. The radio crackled suddenly, louder than before, a clear directive now repeating his name, his rank, his failure to report. Ethan closed his eyes briefly and turned the volume down again, though not all the way. Caelthera noticed, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You are choosing exile," she said. Ethan shook his head. "I am choosing accountability," he replied. "There is a difference." She tilted her head, considering. "Among my kind, exile is punishment without end," she said. "There is no path back." Ethan adjusted the frame and offered her water again. "We build paths back all the time," he said. "We just do not always agree on who deserves to walk them." They resumed their slow progress, the ground rising gently now, revealing a distant line of rock formations that broke the horizon. As they moved, Caelthera began to speak of her people, not in the grand terms of empire or conquest, but in smaller memories, of training grounds lit by twin moons, of mentors who taught discipline before mercy, of victories celebrated loudly and losses erased quietly. Ethan listened without interruption, letting her story unfold at its own pace, understanding that being heard was sometimes as important as being helped. When she finished, there was no dramatic pause, just a quiet sense of something shared. "You do not interrupt," she observed. Ethan smiled faintly. "Marines learn quickly that if you want someone to trust you, you listen first." The ridge drew closer, and Ethan felt the weight of time again, the narrowing window for safe choices. He adjusted the frame one last time before the climb, ensuring every strap held. Calthera reached out and steadied herself against his shoulder, the contact brief but unhesitating. "If we are seen," she said, "there will be consequences for you." Ethan nodded. "I know. And if we are not," she continued, "then this moment will still matter." He met her gaze and saw not an enemy. Not a burden, but a person standing at the edge of a future neither of them could fully see. "That is usually how it works," he said quietly. As they began the careful ascent, the radio fell silent at last, not because the world had stopped calling, but because Ethan had made peace with not answering. Step by step, they moved forward together, carrying not just weight and risk, but the growing understanding that compassion was not an exception to strength, but one of its rarest forms. The ridge narrowed into a natural corridor where the stone walls rose just high enough to block the horizon, and Ethan felt the shift immediately, the way sound dulled and the air grew still, as if the planet itself were listening. He slowed to a stop, placing the frame carefully and crouching beside Calthera, his eyes scanning the passage ahead while his mind weighed options with practiced speed. This route was safer from open sight but offered fewer choices if something went wrong. Calthera sensed the tension before he spoke. "This is where decisions stop being gentle," she said. Ethan nodded once. "This is where they get honest." The radio stirred again, not loud now, but persistent, the same message repeating with a different tone, no longer procedural but concerned, reminding him that help was waiting if he would only answer. Ethan turned it off completely. The silence afterward felt heavier than noise, final in a way that settled deep in his chest. Calthera watched his hand as he powered it down. "If you continue," she said carefully, "you may lose your place among your own." Ethan considered the corridor, the open sky behind them, the woman beside him who had trusted him with more than survival. "I can lose a place," he replied. "I cannot lose myself." The corridor brightened ahead where the stone opened into a shallow basin warmed by reflected light. Ethan moved them forward again, slower now, every step measured, the frame steady despite the incline. Halfway through, he stopped abruptly, raising a hand. Not danger, but proximity. He could feel it, the way the air seemed to press, the faint echo of distant movement carried through the rock. Calthera read his posture and did not ask questions. She adjusted her grip, her shoulders set, her focus sharp. Ethan eased the frame down and shifted his body slightly forward, placing himself between her and the open space ahead without dramatics. "If we are seen," he said quietly, "I will speak. You will stay silent unless I ask otherwise." Calthera studied him, then inclined her head. "Among my people," she said, "leaders stand tallest." Ethan allowed himself a small, humorless smile. "Among mine," he replied, "leaders stand closest." The moment stretched, seconds feeling longer than they were, until the pressure eased and the distant presence moved on, unnoticed or uninterested. Ethan waited another beat before moving again, his pulse settling back into rhythm. They reached the basin at last, the stone forming a shallow shelter warmed by the sun, and Ethan let himself breathe fully for the first time in minutes. He checked the frame, the supplies, the sky, all the small rituals that kept panic at bay. Calthera broke the quiet. "If this costs you everything," she said, "know that it will not be forgotten." Ethan met her gaze, steady and sure. "That is not why I am doing it," he answered. "I know," she said. "That is why it matters." They rested there briefly, two figures framed by stone and light, aware that the hardest part was no longer the path ahead but the consequences waiting beyond it, consequences Ethan had already accepted in the only way that mattered, by continuing to move forward. The basin held more than warmth. As the sun climbed, its light caught on faint markings etched into the stone, lines too deliberate to be natural, and Ethan noticed the way Calthera's posture changed when she saw them, her spine straightening as if memory had been triggered rather than pain. "You recognize this place," he said quietly. She nodded once. This is not shelter by chance, she replied. It is a marker. Ethan followed her gaze to the symbols, abstract yet purposeful, worn smooth by time. What kind of marker? He asked. Kael'thera drew a slow breath. Among my people, she said, these stones are placed where vows are taken. Where warriors swear to protect life, not territory. Ethan felt something settle into place, a realization forming that made the quiet feel suddenly significant. You were not just any warrior, he said. She met his eyes, the violet depth there steady and unflinching. I was sworn to that oath, she said. And I was chosen to carry it beyond our borders. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Ethan processed it carefully, understanding now the way others had looked at her on the battlefield, the reason abandonment had come so easily once she could no longer stand as a symbol of strength. They did not just leave a wounded soldier behind, he said. They left an idea. Kael'thera inclined her head, accepting the truth of it. I was meant to remind my people that mercy is not weakness, she said. When I fell, that reminder became inconvenient. Ethan glanced down at the beacon still tucked in his pack, then back at her. If they find you, he said, will they listen now? Kael'thera considered the markings again, then shook her head slowly. Not yet, she answered. Symbols must be seen in context. She reached out then, her hand steady, and touched the frame he had built, the human ingenuity holding her upright. This, she said, is context. Ethan felt a quiet surge of something he did not name, pride mixed with humility. He removed the beacon and held it between them. This can tell them where you are, he said. Or it can tell my people where I am. Kael'thera looked at the device, then at him. And what does it tell you? She asked. Ethan did not hesitate. It tells me I chose right. She studied his face, searching for doubt and finding none. Then, with deliberate care, she placed her hand over his and gently pressed the beacon back toward him. Not yet, she repeated. When this speaks, it must say more than coordinates. It must say why. The air seemed to lighten after that, as if the basin itself approved of the decision. Ethan secured the beacon again and adjusted the frame, preparing to move. As he did, Kael'thera spoke once more, her voice softer now. If my people learn what you have done, she said, there will be consequences beyond this world. Ethan smiled faintly, the expression worn but sincere. Then maybe it is time they learned something new. They left the basin together, the ancient markings fading behind them, carrying forward not just survival, but the quiet weight of an oath renewed in an unexpected way, one that did not belong to a single species, but to anyone willing to stand for dignity when it would have been easier to walk away. They reached the edge of the basin where the land sloped gently downward toward a narrow valley, the kind that funneled wind and sound alike, and Ethan stopped there, knowing without checking that this was as far as he could reasonably take her. Beyond this point, the terrain favored speed and numbers, not patience. He set the frame down carefully and knelt, adjusting the final strap with the same care he had used from the beginning, as if ritual itself might grant protection. Kael'thera understood before he spoke. This is where we separate, she said, not as a question but as acknowledgement. Ethan nodded, his gaze steady though something tight settled behind his ribs. There is a relay outpost beyond the ridge, he said. Neutral ground. If I activate the beacon here, it will draw attention without placing you directly in their path. Kael'thera considered the valley, then him. And you, she asked, what will you do? Ethan removed the beacon at last, holding it in his open palm, the small device suddenly feeling heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. I will answer the calls I ignored, he said. I will tell the truth. She studied his face, the lines there shaped by years of duty and a single choice that had changed its direction. Then she did something unexpected. She straightened, lifting her chin, her posture unmistakably that of a warrior addressing a peer. When my people find me, she said, they will ask who stood with me when I could no longer stand alone. Ethan swallowed, then met her gaze. Tell them my name, he replied. And tell them why. He activated the beacon and set it on a rock between them, its soft pull steady and unhurried, like a heartbeat. For a moment, neither moved. The wind carried dust through the valley, the sky wide and indifferent overhead. Caelthera reached out and clasped his forearm, her grip firm, deliberate, a gesture of respect that transcended custom. You have honored an oath you never swore, she said. Ethan smiled faintly. Some promises do not need words. The beacon pulsed again, brighter now, its signal traveling outward into a universe that would soon have questions. Ethan stepped back, giving her space, trusting the choice he had made all the way through. As he turned to leave, Caelthera called his name once more. When this war is remembered, she said, it will not be for who conquered whom. It will be for who refused to abandon dignity. Ethan did not reply. He simply raised a hand in acknowledgement and walked away, the weight on his shoulders lighter now despite everything he had given up. Behind him, the beacon continued its steady glow, and ahead of him lay consequences he would face without regret. Somewhere between those 2 points, a line had been drawn, not on a map, but in the quiet understanding that compassion, chosen freely, could echo farther than any order ever given.